Welcome back. We have now looked at all 5 categories of musical instruments: aerophones, chordophones, idiophones, membranophones, and electrophones. Now we're going to listen to one of each just to reinforce what we already know. So the aerophones are the first ones we're going to look at, specifically the trumpet. An aerophone is a musical instrument that produces sound primarily by causing a body of air to vibrate. So all brass and woodwind instruments fall into this category. There are a few others: recorders, harmonicas, that kind of thing. The most common trumpet in modern times is the B-flat trumpet. The one that you see a picture of there with Alison Balsom, that is a C trumpet, and it's a little bit shorter, plays in the same key as the piano and the flute, and it is a little bit brighter sounding. But the B-flat trumpet is most common. During the Egyptian dynasties, about 1500 BC, is when the first metal trumpets came into use. They actually discovered a couple of silver trumpets in King Tut's tomb when they opened it. And there is a recording of somebody playing on that instrument, and it sounds absolutely terrible. But you can look that up. So the Egyptians actually used metal trumpets. Interesting. There is another sort of long trumpet, same principles, made from a hollowed out tree, and it's used in the Alps, usually mountainous regions, for herding cows, summoning communities, used to call to church, and war calls. It's called an Alp horn. You've ever seen a commercial for Ricola? That's what they use in that. The valves on a trumpet, you can see that Alison Balsom there on the picture has her middle valve pointed down, depressed. They were not added until modern trumpets until 1814. And what that did was give trumpet players the use of all the notes of the chromatic scale. Prior to that, trumpets did not have valves, and composers would just write them basically like timpani parts. So if you're listening to music from the 19th century, most of the trumpet parts are pretty basic. There is another instrument called a cornet that is much like the trumpet, but they are not the same instrument. A trumpet is cylindrical, and a cornet is conical. So they have a slightly different sound. The cornet sounds a bit more mellow, and the trumpet sounds a bit more strident or straightforward. Most modern trumpets are made of brass because it's an easy metal to work with. It's easy to bend once you heat it up, and it stays in place. Metal has memory and will go back to where you put it. So that's why most instruments you see now are made of brass. A lot of times they are polished, highly polished, and covered with lacquer, or plated with silver or sometimes gold. The first documented piece of music that brought trumpets into the concert stage, in an opera specifically, was the year 1603. Monteverdi wrote a thing called L'Orfeo. It was the story of Orpheus going down into the underworld. And that was the first time that we heard trumpets in a formal concert setting. The big book of trumpet playing is called the Arban's Book. It's about that thick, and every trumpet player in the world has this book, and they know it. It was first published when Jean-Baptiste Arban was the professor of cornet at the Paris Conservatory in 1864. Now, there have been many editions since then. Now you can get them nicely printed with a spiral binding so it stays open. But really, the basic stuff in there hasn't changed in 170 years. So it's still good stuff. B-flat is still a B-flat. The trumpet has a pretty wide range. Typically, you only see it written down to an F sharp below the treble clef staff, up to 2, 3, sometimes 4 ledger lines above the staff. But there are notes that are below that. We call them pedal tones. They're very difficult to play. They're not impossible, but it's hard to get them to sound good. All right, that's a little bit about the trumpet. Let's listen to Miss Alison Balsom. She is a phenomenal player from England, and she's going to play some Bach for us. It's written for the cello, but it sounds quite good on trumpet. So let me know what you think of this one. She is a pretty fantastic player, I gotta say. Okay, next week we will look at membranophones again, and we will be studying an Indian instrument called the tabla. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.